Marcus Williams stepped out of his black BMW, adjusting his expensive watch as he surveyed the crowded parking lot of the small diner. The neon sign flickered above, casting an eerie glow on the cracked asphalt. He wasn't used to places like this, but his GPS had led him here after his phone died, and he desperately needed directions to his business meeting across town. The autumn wind cut through his tailored suit as he pushed through the glass door, the bell chiming his arrival. The diner was busier than he expected for a Tuesday afternoon. Construction workers occupied most of the booths, their hard hats and reflective vests a stark contrast to his polished appearance. Behind the counter stood a woman in her early 30s, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a faded uniform that had seen better days. Sarah Martinez wiped down the counter with practiced efficiency, her movements precise and controlled. She had been working double shifts at the diner for 3 months now, saving every penny she could. The smell of coffee and bacon grease had become as familiar to her as the sound of helicopter rotors once was. Her co-workers knew little about her past, and she preferred it that way. To them, she was just another waitress, trying to make ends meet. Marcus approached the counter with the confidence of someone accustomed to being served immediately. He tapped his manicured fingers impatiently on the formica surface, checking his Rolex again. The meeting he was rushing to could secure a multi-million-dollar contract for his construction company, and being late was not an option. "Excuse me," he said sharply, his voice carrying the authority he was used to wielding in boardrooms. "I need directions to the Riverside Business Complex. My phone's dead, and I'm already running behind schedule." Sarah looked up from the coffee pot she was filling, her brown eyes meeting his briefly. "It's about 15 minutes from here if you take Highway 9 north," she replied politely, her voice steady despite the dismissive tone he had used. "Turn right at the second traffic light after the bridge." Marcus barely acknowledged her response, already turning away as if the conversation was over. But then he remembered something his assistant had mentioned about needing to confirm the meeting location. He spun back around, frustration evident in his expression. "Wait," he said, louder this time, causing several customers to glance in their direction. "I need to use your phone. This is important business." Sarah nodded toward the payphone in the corner. "There's a phone over there, 50 cents for local calls." The suggestion that he should use a dirty payphone like some common person sent a surge of anger through Marcus. He was Marcus Williams, owner of Williams Construction, a man who commanded respect wherever he went. His company employed over 200 people, and his net worth was something these working-class people could never comprehend. "I'm not using some filthy payphone," he snapped, his voice rising. "I need to use a real phone." "Don't you have one behind the counter?" Sarah maintained her composure, though something flickered in her eyes that would have given a wiser man pause. "I'm sorry, sir, but the restaurant phone is for business use only. The payphone works fine, and it's clean." The other customers were watching now, the low hum of conversation gradually dying down. Marcus felt their eyes on him, these blue-collar workers probably enjoying seeing a successful businessman being denied what he considered a simple request. The humiliation of the situation only fueled his anger further. "Do you know who I am?" he demanded, leaning across the counter. "I probably make more in a week than you make in a year. I drive a car worth more than you'll see in your lifetime. And you're worried about me using your precious phone?" Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained level. "Sir, I understand you're frustrated. But the policy applies to everyone. The payphone is your best option." Marcus's face flushed red. The stress of the important meeting, combined with what he saw as disrespect from someone he considered far beneath his social status, pushed him over the edge. In his world, money talked, and people like this waitress were supposed to bend over backward to accommodate people like him. "Listen here, you little," he started, jabbing his finger at her across the counter, but Sarah cut him off, her voice now carrying a subtle edge that only someone with military training might recognize. "Sir, I'm going to ask you once to lower your voice and treat the other customers with respect. If you can't do that, you'll need to leave." The challenge in her voice was unmistakable, and it hit Marcus like a slap. No one spoke to him that way, especially not some nobody waitress in a rundown diner. His business empire hadn't been built by backing down from confrontation, and he certainly wasn't going to start with her. "You're going to ask me?" He laughed harshly. "You're nobody. You're nothing. You serve coffee and take orders from people like me." The entire diner had gone silent now. Even the cook had stopped working to watch the confrontation unfold. Sarah stood perfectly still behind the counter, her hands resting calmly at her sides. But those who knew what to look for might have noticed the subtle shift in her posture, the way her weight settled evenly on both feet. Marcus continued his tirade, his voice echoing off the diner's walls. "I could buy this whole place and fire you, just for the fun of it. You think you can talk to me like that? I've ruined people for less." One of the construction workers started to stand, recognizing that the situation was escalating beyond mere rudeness. But Sarah caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. She had dealt with far worse than an angry businessman, and she didn't need anyone fighting her battles. "Sir," she said quietly, "I'm going to give you one last chance to calm down and either order something or leave peacefully." Marcus saw the slight gesture she had made to the construction worker, and it enraged him further. The idea that this woman thought she could control the situation, that she believed she had any power in this confrontation, was more than his ego could handle. Without warning, his hand shot across the counter. The slap echoed through the silent diner like a gunshot. For a moment, time seemed frozen. Sarah's head had turned slightly from the impact, but she remained standing, her expression unchanged. Marcus stood there, his hand still extended, suddenly realizing what he had done. The anger that had driven him to that point began to evaporate, replaced by a creeping awareness that he might have made a serious mistake. Sarah slowly turned her head back to face him, a small red mark forming on her cheek. But instead of tears or shock, her eyes held something that made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. It was the look of a predator that had just been awakened by its prey. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then Sarah spoke, her voice so calm it was almost conversational. "You just made a very serious mistake." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he looked into Sarah's eyes. There was something different about her now, something that hadn't been there moments before. The mild-mannered waitress had vanished, replaced by someone who radiated a quiet, controlled danger that he couldn't quite understand. "What did you say?" Marcus stammered, trying to regain his composure and the authority he felt slipping away. Sarah moved with fluid precision around the end of the counter. Each step was measured, purposeful, like a cat stalking its prey. The other customers instinctively moved back, sensing the shift in atmosphere, even if they couldn't explain it. Some primal part of their minds recognized that they were witnessing something far beyond a simple disagreement between a customer and a waitress. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent diner. "Petty Officer, First Class, Sarah Martinez, United States Navy SEALs, retired. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. I've been shot at by enemy snipers, survived IED explosions, and completed missions that remain classified to this day." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. He tried to process what she was saying, but his mind seemed unable to grasp the reality of the situation. This woman, this ordinary-looking waitress who had been serving coffee and taking orders, was claiming to be one of the most elite soldiers in the world. "You're lying," he said weakly. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. Everything about her had changed. Her posture, her movement, even the way she breathed, spoke of years of intensive training and real combat experience. Sarah continued her approach, and Marcus found himself backing toward the door despite his conscious desire to stand his ground. "I spent 8 years protecting people like you," she continued. "I risked my life so that entitled businessmen could sit in their comfortable offices and complain about their trivial problems without worrying about enemy rockets or suicide bombers." The construction workers watched in fascination as this drama unfolded. One of them, a veteran himself, recognized the bearing and the controlled intensity that could only come from special forces training. He quietly took out his phone and began recording, sensing that whatever was about to happen would be something worth documenting. "During my service," Sarah said, now standing directly in front of Marcus, "I learned many valuable skills. I can field strip an assault rifle blindfolded. I can navigate by the stars alone. I can survive in hostile territory for weeks with minimal supplies." She paused, letting her eyes meet his. "And I can neutralize a threat in 17 different ways, using just my bare hands." Marcus felt sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the diner. Every instinct he had was telling him to run. But his pride and disbelief kept his feet planted. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to successful businessmen in ordinary diners. "I also learned about honor," Sarah continued, beginning to circle him slowly like a shark circling wounded prey. "About protecting those who can't protect themselves. About standing up to bullies and cowards who think their money gives them the right to abuse other people." The cook had emerged from the kitchen now, his arms crossed as he watched the confrontation. He had hired Sarah 3 months ago, and while he had always sensed there was more to her story than she let on, he had never imagined anything like this. The way she moved, the authority in her voice, the complete transformation from mild-mannered waitress to something far more dangerous was like watching a movie. "You see," Sarah said, stopping directly in front of Marcus again, "when someone like you strikes someone like me, it's not just assault, it's an attack on everything I swore to protect. Every value I fought for, every principle I nearly died defending." Marcus tried to speak, to offer some kind of apology or explanation, but his throat seemed to have closed up. He was a man accustomed to being in control, to having the upper hand in every situation. But now he found himself completely out of his depth. The expensive suit that usually gave him confidence felt like a costume, and his usual bluster had deserted him entirely. "I've seen real evil," Sarah continued, her voice taking on a hardness that spoke of experiences Marcus couldn't even imagine. "I've faced down terrorists who would kill children without a second thought. I've fought against people who truly had no regard for human life or dignity. But you know what? Even they had more honor than someone who would strike a woman he perceives as defenseless." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone present. Marcus had chosen to attack someone he thought was vulnerable, someone he believed couldn't fight back. Instead, he had awakened something far more dangerous than anything he had ever encountered in his sheltered world of business dealings and boardroom negotiations. Sarah reached into her apron pocket and slowly withdrew something. Marcus's eyes widened as he saw what appeared to be a military challenge coin, its brass surface worn from years of handling. She held it up so he could see the Navy SEAL trident embossed on its surface. "This was given to me by my commanding officer after my final mission," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper that somehow seemed more threatening than any shout. "A mission where we rescued hostages from a compound defended by over 40 enemy combatants. We went in outnumbered 10 to 1. And we brought everyone home alive." Marcus stared at the coin, the reality of his situation finally beginning to penetrate his shock. This wasn't some elaborate joke or misunderstanding. The woman standing before him really was trained to kill, and he had just given her every legal and moral justification she needed to show him exactly what that training had taught her. "The question now," Sarah said, pocketing the coin, "is what I'm going to do about your assault. I have several options, each one perfectly legal and completely justified." The blood had drained from Marcus's face entirely now. He thought about his important business meeting, his successful company, his reputation in the community. Everything he had worked for his entire life could be destroyed by what he had done in a moment of entitled rage. "I could restrain you until the police arrive," Sarah continued, beginning to circle him again. "Assault charges against someone like you would definitely make the local news. I imagine your business clients would find it very interesting to learn about how you treat working people." Marcus tried to imagine the headlines, the damage to his reputation, the inevitable lawsuits, and loss of contracts. His company's image was everything in the construction business, and being known as someone who attacked service workers would be devastating. "I could defend myself right here and now," Sarah added casually. "You struck me first, so anything I do in response would be completely legal self-defense. And trust me, my definition of proportional response might be very different from what you're expecting." The construction worker who had been recording held his breath, wondering if he was about to capture something that would go viral across the entire internet. The idea of watching a Navy SEAL take down an abusive businessman was appealing, but he could also sense that Sarah was walking a careful line between justice and restraint. Sarah stopped directly in front of Marcus one final time. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone who had faced life and death situations and emerged victorious. "Or," she said, "I could give you one chance to show me that underneath all that entitlement and arrogance, there might still be something resembling a decent human being." The offer hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Marcus realized that despite everything he had done, despite the way he had treated her and everyone else in the diner, she was giving him an opportunity to salvage something from this disaster. But he also understood that whatever she had in mind would not be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be pleasant. The woman standing before him had been forged in the crucible of combat, and her idea of a fair resolution would likely be very different from anything he had ever experienced. The entire diner waited in complete silence to see what Marcus Williams would choose, and what Sarah Martinez, Navy SEAL, would do about it. Marcus swallowed hard, his expensive suit now feeling like a shroud rather than armor. The weight of every eye in the diner pressed down on him as he realized that his next words would determine not just his immediate fate, but possibly the entire future of his reputation and business empire. "What do you want?" he managed to whisper, his voice barely audible. Sarah studied him for a long moment, her trained eyes reading every micro-expression, every sign of fear and desperation that he was trying to hide. In Afghanistan, her life had often depended on accurately assessing whether someone could be trusted or posed a threat. The skills that had kept her alive in combat zones were now focused entirely on Marcus Williams. "First," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, "you're going to apologize, not to me, but to every single person in this diner whose lunch you disrupted with your tantrum." Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding him. The construction workers, the cook, the elderly couple in the corner booth, the young mother with her toddler. All of them were watching him with expressions ranging from disgust to curiosity. The humiliation of having to apologize to people he had always considered beneath his social status felt almost physical. "I'm sorry," he began weakly, but Sarah cut him off immediately. "Louder," she commanded. "And with conviction. These people deserve to hear that you understand what you did was wrong." Marcus took a shaky breath and raised his voice. "I'm sorry for my behavior. I was completely out of line, and you didn't deserve to have your meal interrupted by my actions." The words felt foreign in his mouth, like a language he had never learned to speak properly. Sarah nodded but wasn't finished. "Second, you're going to pay for everyone's meal today. Every single person in this diner." The financial impact was negligible compared to Marcus's wealth, but the symbolic weight was enormous. He was being forced to serve the very people he had looked down on, to acknowledge their worth in the most basic way possible. He pulled out his wallet with trembling hands, grateful that he always carried substantial cash for business purposes. "And third," Sarah continued, her eyes never leaving his face, "you're going to listen to a story. You're going to understand exactly who you decided to attack today." She gestured toward an empty booth, and Marcus moved toward it, like a man walking to his execution. The other customers gradually returned to their conversations, but their attention remained focused on the drama unfolding in the corner of the diner. Sarah slid into the seat across from him, and for the first time since the confrontation began, Marcus got a clear look at her hands. They were calloused and scarred in ways that spoke of hard work and harder training. A thin line across her knuckles might have been from broken glass or shrapnel. These weren't the soft hands of someone who had lived an easy life. "I grew up in a neighborhood not unlike this one," Sarah began, her voice taking on a different quality as she shifted from military authority to personal storytelling. "My father worked construction. Just like some of the men sitting behind you, my mother cleaned office buildings at night to make ends meet. We never had much money, but we had dignity. Marcus found himself listening despite his fear and humiliation. There was something about her voice that commanded attention, the same quality that had probably made her an effective leader in combat situations. When I enlisted, Sarah continued, it wasn't out of some grand patriotic ideal. It was because I needed a way to pay for college, and the military was the only option I had. But something happened during training. I discovered I was good at it. Really good. She paused to take a sip of water, and Marcus noticed that even this simple action was performed with precision and awareness. Her eyes constantly scanned the room, a habit formed by years of needing to identify threats and escape routes. SEAL training is designed to break you down completely and then rebuild you into something stronger, she explained. Out of my class of over 100 candidates, only 12 of us made it through. The physical demands were brutal, but the mental challenges were worse. They push you past every limit you thought you had. Marcus tried to imagine this woman, probably 20 pounds lighter and years younger, enduring the legendary hell of SEAL training. The stories he had heard made it sound like something beyond human endurance. Yet she had not only survived but excelled. My first deployment was to Afghanistan, Sarah continued, her voice taking on a distant quality as if she was seeing things Marcus couldn't imagine. We were tasked with disrupting supply lines and gathering intelligence on terrorist operations. I learned what real evil looked like, and I learned what it meant to fight for something bigger than yourself. The diner around them seemed to fade away, as Sarah's story drew Marcus into a world completely foreign to his experience of business lunches and golf course negotiations. I was shot twice during my service, she said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. Once in the shoulder during a raid on a weapons cache, and once in the leg when our convoy hit an improvised explosive device. Both times, my teammates risked their lives to get me to safety, just as I had done for them. Marcus felt ashamed of every minor inconvenience he had ever complained about. A delayed flight, a cold meal, a slow internet connection. None of it seemed significant compared to what this woman had endured. But the worst part, Sarah continued, wasn't the physical danger. It was coming home and trying to readjust to civilian life. Try explaining to a job interviewer that your primary skills involve small unit tactics and hostage rescue. Try making small talk about the weather when you've seen children orphaned by suicide bombers. The pain in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus began to understand that her job at the diner wasn't just about making money. It was about finding a way to connect with normal life again, to feel useful in a world that no longer needed her particular set of skills. I took this job 3 months ago, Sarah said, because I needed to feel normal again. I wanted to serve people in a different way, to be part of a community instead of always being ready for war. And for the most part, it's worked. I've enjoyed talking with the customers, learning their stories, being part of their daily routines. Marcus realized with growing horror that he had violated something sacred, her attempt to heal and rebuild her life after years of sacrifice. Until today, Sarah concluded, her eyes meeting his directly. Today, someone decided that my service, my sacrifice, and my attempt to build a peaceful life meant nothing, that I was just another target for his frustration and entitlement. The silence stretched between them as Marcus processed everything he had heard. Finally, he found his voice. I don't know how to apologize for what I've done, he said. And for the first time, his words carried genuine emotion instead of calculated manipulation. I had no idea who you were or what you've been through. But that's not an excuse. Even if you were just a waitress with no military background, you didn't deserve what I did. Sarah nodded slowly. That's the first intelligent thing you've said today. Marcus pulled out his business card and placed it on the table between them. I want to do more than just apologize. I want to make this right. My company employs a lot of veterans, and I think I've been taking their skills and their service for granted. Maybe you could help me understand how to do better. Sarah picked up the card and studied it for a moment. Marcus Williams, Williams Construction, she read aloud. I've heard of your company. You built the new community center downtown. Well, we did, Marcus confirmed. surprised that she knew of his work. "We've been trying to give back to the community, but I realize now that I might have been approaching it all wrong." Sarah leaned back in the booth, and for the first time since the confrontation began, some of the tension left her posture. "There are a lot of veterans struggling to find meaningful work," she said. "People with leadership experience, technical skills, and the kind of reliability that comes from military discipline. But they're often overlooked because civilian employers don't understand how to translate military experience into workplace value." Marcus found himself genuinely interested in what she was saying. "What would you suggest?" Quote, "Start by treating people with respect, regardless of their current position," Sarah replied. "That construction worker recording us on his phone? He's probably got skills and experience you've never bothered to learn about. The cook in the kitchen might have insights that could improve your business operations. Everyone has value if you take the time to see it." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Sarah sharing insights about leadership, teamwork, and the importance of treating every person with dignity. Marcus found himself taking notes on napkins, genuinely eager to learn from someone whose perspective was completely different from his own. When Sarah finally stood to return to work, Marcus remained seated for a moment longer. "What happens now?" he asked. Sarah looked down at him, and her expression had softened from the dangerous intensity of earlier. "Now you go to your business meeting," she said. "But before you do, you think about what kind of person you want to be. The kind who builds people up, or the kind who tears them down." Marcus left the diner that day a changed man. The business meeting he had been so worried about seemed trivial compared to the lesson he had learned. Over the following months, he implemented new hiring practices that actively sought out veterans, improved workplace respect protocols, and began volunteering with organizations that supported military families. Sarah continued working at the diner, but she also began consulting with local businesses on leadership development and team building. Her military experience, combined with her newfound understanding of civilian workplace dynamics, made her uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between military and civilian cultures. The story of their confrontation, captured on the construction worker's phone, did eventually go viral on social media. But instead of becoming a cautionary tale about entitled behavior, it became a powerful example of how understanding and respect could transform even the most difficult situations. Marcus never forgot the lesson that sometimes the most extraordinary people can be found in the most ordinary places, and that true strength comes not from power or wealth, but from the willingness to serve others and stand up for what's right.